Professor of Law, Professor of Political Science, and Director of the Columbia Center for Contemporary and Critical Thought at Columbia University. And I'd like to mention two books that we have authored and that are of particular relevance tonight. Occupy, Three Inquiries in Disobedience in 2013, and actually a book that is going to be published, I think in February 2018, The Counter-Revolution, How Our Government Went to War Against Its Own Citizens. Etienne Balibar is Professor Emeritus of Moral and Political Philosophy at Balibar.This in Harcourt. Also professor at the University of California, and it's finished, part-time chair in Modern European Philosophy at the University of Kingston, London. This is still going on. And this is most important, you're a visiting professor each full semester at the University, invited by the French department. Your first book was published, I think, in 1965, so I'll introduce two, which are relevant for tonight's conversation. Violence and Civility and the Limits of Political Philosophy was published in English in 2015. And Des Universelles, essay conférence in 2016, I think universality was one of the topics of Nuit Debout. My first question will go to Etienne Balibar. Nuit Debout, I'll use the French term, which is nice, actually. I think the English translation is not that good, so I'll say Nuit Debout. Was at the same time apolitical and highly political. It was, of course, about democracy, and Mariana Otero said beautifully that the main protagonist of her film was democracy. I would like you to comment on the way the women and men on the square stage and invoke this protagonist, democracy.
I don't know if I can say something.
Do you want me to ask her another question?
No, I think why not say? I was not at Nuit Debout. Are there people here who were part of this event or movement? Okay, so I think they should speak first. I'm disturbing a little bit your order, but because of course one first thing to address is so I was not at Nuit Debout for a number of reasons, but today I understand better in a sense. This was not my place. I'm too old. I've seen too many such moments, if you like, in my life, in which, of course, always with some slight differences, nuances, because the circumstances that give rise to the movement, launch it, select the people taking part. Somebody alluded to that at some point. In a rather sociological manner, the workers are not here. We should have added the banlieue are not here, something crucial in any discussion or understanding of today's France. Just as you might say, of course, Black Lives Matter didn't yet really exist, but we're not at Occupy Wall Street. I mean, these cleavages are extremely, but they are moving. You should not just adopt a sociological. They have something to do with the question of democracy, of course, because democracy, even if, or above all, if it's not representative democracy in the sense of parliamentary democracy, has something to do with putting together, having, participating in a kind of civic conversation, if you like. I would say the whole people, that means nothing. It's significant sections or groups which, isolated from one another, won't change anything in the social and political situation. So I've seen many such situations, each time different modalities and reasons, circumstances, global environments, colonial wars, May 68, which owes something to colonial war but is already something else. Huge also social movements where the students, as here of course, would massively participate at different moments, always of course reacting against something that is perceived as unacceptable or revealing of current degradation of our common conditions. So this was for my grandsons, I believe, and I'm also not one of these old, very nice, I would say, professional anarchists, like Orestes Calzone and some others who are there too. So, and I don't want to now be the political philosopher, the political theorist who says this is what they have achieved. This is why they failed.
Because there's
I'm terribly. I'm sad in a sense at the end of the film. I don't buy for 1 second. Not only I don't buy the idea that this was continued during the elections just after that, or this is the starting point for something that will never end. And at some point, and okay, I said I wouldn't speak, so I should stop. Like the 2 minutes. The 2 minutes is a terrible thing. My feeling is that it completely prevented this movement. I regret that we don't see the commission. I don't know if it worked like that. From what I heard, from what you can read, for example, in this extremely interesting issue of L'État moderne, which certainly is biased, and Patrice Manillier, who organizes it, has the final word in 100 pages at the end, and so on and so on. But I can circulate it if you like. You learn things different about the way in which on specific subjects they would discuss, and it's not that you don't. I heard many original formulas and moving and interesting phrases, but I had a desperate feeling at some point, and maybe I was wrong, and if I'm wrong, tell me you are absolutely wrong, that what we were witnessing was a desperate attempt, a collective attempt at inventing or finding, I would say, finding the way in which you can discuss. And at the end, of course, you don't find it. And rather early in the film, and they say it. We know that this is going to end nowhere. And the government has nothing to fear of us. The existing order has nothing to fear. So that, of course, raises a very important question, because among the things that, I'm not attacking the director, but among the things that we heard at the time that raised controversies that you could hear in the moment when the question of violence was evoked, was the question of the police violence and brutality. So, of course, you see at some point that they're trying, that some participants are trying to record, video record, or with their iPhones, etc. The police, which is about launching. You see the tear gas, etc. There was more violence than that. So my grandson, I have two, who was part of that, said to me, "We've never seen such a level of violence in the history of France." I said to him, "Keep quiet. We have seen even bigger levels of violence at other moments, etc., even recently. But still, the fact is that the police was extremely violent." And so in my head, the two things are clashing. On the one hand, I think, what could a government fear of that? I mean, the talk of general strike is this fantasy. It's raised by a small group of students. On the other hand, why were they so violent? Why were they so violent? If not, because in a sense, and that's not only Valls, that also all the government, and soon it will be Macron, of course, who for the moment now, of course, is pulling is winning the etc. So they perceive that their governance or their rule or their I would say their domination, I would say the kind of political apparatus and power that they represent has become very fragile. But on the other side, they don't know how to cope with that.
Bernard Harcourt, we have the same melancholic approach, the same reading.
No, I'm sure he's more optimistic.
So my one, without wanting to disrupt too much our panel, though, I mean, I do have this odd feeling of having just watched these general assemblies with like 2-minute limits in a room full of people who have extraordinary perspectives on this, and who actually, some of them were here. I'm feeling a little bit odd that we're in this position. So I'll try to limit it to 3 minutes, myself. Maybe we can pass it around. You want to time me? So I think that, I mean, all of these different movements have to be understood, I think, in their specific historical conjuncture, right? And so it was clear that this movement, a little bit like Occupy Wall Street, was in a very important way trying to mimic a kind of society in terms of a kind of democratic, participatory society that they wanted to imagine. This idea of prefiguring, which was very important in the Occupy Wall Street context. And I think that what you see here is an enormous amount of kind of actually instantiating the principles that we believe in, that we would want a society to have, that we would want a revolution to bring about. But there's obviously then this temporal problem of bringing about a revolution, which becomes increasingly difficult when you're living through and trying to instantiate the space of democratic participation. Because of course it doesn't allow for the kind of vanguardist revolutionary, and you heard overtones of that throughout here, right? You know, but there wasn't an opportunity in a kind of, you know, Leninist April thesis way to take this moment and to then push it in a more revolutionary direction, because at the same time it was so instantiating this. Now, obviously these different kinds of occupations, Tahrir Square, République, Zuccotti Park, have to be thought of, I think, in their particular context. And the context here, of course, was the labor laws, and which could then have, and here's where one could imagine where it could, I mean, it could have led to, or it could have helped promote a general strike, right? I mean, that would have been, in some sense, the natural déroulement or possible déroulement or something like this, of a movement that ultimately spreads and leads to something that would be tied to the triggering mechanism, which would have been a general strike, which might have had some effect. Tahrir Square, the thing that it was tied to was bringing down Mubarak, right? And it did, but obviously only in part because the military were able to use it as a way to engage in power relations at the domestic level. Occupy Wall Street, you know, it's hard to figure out what exactly would have been the automatic kind of success What would it have been? But I do think that here, had there been more momentum to this, and had there been a general strike, there would have been something achieved. Maybe I've gotten to my 3 minutes. I don't know. How am I doing?
Exactly. You timed it right.
All right. Well, I'll raise my hand later then.
One thing about the police, if I may voice the method of Nuit Debout, it is precisely what she did not want to film, because mainstream media, so the media was there the first week, and she couldn't even film because so people would think that she was the media, so they would prevent her from filming. So she put a sign, like a assumed sign on her jacket saying, "We are not the media, we are independent documentary filmmakers." And so people would get used to her and they would say, "Oh, elle est dingue comme nous, mais elle a une caméra." She's a lunatic as we are, but she has a camera. And the mainstream media just focused on the violence, of course, not the violence of the police, of the riot police, but of the rioters, the casseurs. So it's exactly what she did not want to show. She wanted to show the process of parole, of speech, of political awareness rising. So that's really what she focused on during the day, because it was at night that it would become a bit more tense. So it was a deliberate choice. But she was arrested because she was filming. And some people from her crew as well, and were really detained for even 48 hours. So and indeed, it's exactly what Nuit Debout tried to break, that kind of bipartition of a room, of having the experts commenting. So we'll definitely, use the microphone and use in the room. Etienne, Balibar, do you want to add something? No, it's over. well, if you could actually have 3 minutes about one question that I would really like to ask you.
No?
Yes, now. Well, I would like you to comment on the fact that it seems so French, this marriage or this intersection between labor and the critique of labor law and revolution, or the want of the drive for revolution. And it comes again and again. The commissions, when they meet, they say, "Oh, but we should focus again on la loi du travail," when it's obvious that it's going elsewhere. But they keep going back to that loi du travail. So
that's because labor has become something extremely elusive. Labor has become something extremely elusive. I don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying because you hear this discourse from politicians, from sociologists, from philosophers, there's no longer labor. It's the end. So that can mean very different things. There will be only machines. There will be only service activities and so on and so on. So I don't believe this is as simple as that. But the fact is, speaking of general strike and revolution, these are 19th century concepts that were continued, I would say, over the 20th century. And this is very important. This is one of the objects of what Bernard and Jesus are organizing on 1313. There is a new session in 2 days, etc. This is, in a sense, what I'm trying to discuss with some students who are here on a smaller scale in my little seminar this year, which has the name Revolution, a Future Past. I could have put General Strike, a Future Past. A general strike has become a myth, as we know, but this myth was based on realities. It's been approached, I would say, in practice. And it's been approached on the basis, sorry to be as materialistic and sociological as that, of a certain type of working class, in the broad sense, in factories, in cities, with organizations that took almost a century to create, to build themselves. In some countries, they became extremely powerful. The biggest quasi-general strikes, in a sense, took place in this country, in the United States, in the early 20th century, in France and other places, after which, okay, so you needed something like unions. But we also know that there was always a tension between the organization on one side and the spontaneity growing out of living circumstances and so on. So it's a very complex phenomenon. But the equivalent for our times of job precariousness, completely different combination, I would say, of manual and intellectual components of what we call labor. In transgression, Negri is right on that, of course, and others, of the boundary between production and services, reproduction, the family, general strikes. I don't say there were no women, but they were made essentially by men. But so, Nuit Debout was right. Again, I would be negative, which I hate, because perhaps and I'll stop there. Perhaps the thing to say, and I pass it to you all, is yes, I agree. They are all, because the occasion was a massive blow on traditional forms of welfare and social rights. And this continues, of course, because after the war in Congo, we had a new Macron just a few weeks ago, which is even worse, and so he was one of the, etc. So because the occasion was that, and because on the other hand, and I'm not saying because they are petit bourgeois, as some say, or students, etc., because it's more generally a generational phenomenon. There's this powerful, this not only this aspiration, I would say, this desire, not, I would put it in Garcia's terms, not to hate democracy, not to reject democracy, this very blah, 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 but to invent the modalities, the forms, bottom up. That's important. It's not enough, but it's crucial. That would relive it, etc. So they're trying to find that articulation between the new status of labor and the new possibilities or modalities of democracy. So in a sense, they're not dropping any of these two. They're trying to combine. They don't know how. And of course, I know even less.
Harcourt, you wanted to react?
Yeah, so I might be a little bit more ecumenical in my protest, in the sense that, because maybe I have less of a sense of what is the proper way to engage or bring about real social change. And so I'm more kind of supportive, perhaps, of an instance like this as a form of experimentation to see what comes of it. Now, in terms of general strike, yeah, I mean, I wasn't saying general strike in terms of the real general strike, but in terms of a large-scale strike. So I was in France during the whole fall of 2007. In the fall of 2007, and there were major strikes there. The RATP was down, and I mean, and it did put a halt to the change in the labor laws. And so, I mean, one could imagine without a full-scale general strike that actually strikes could have had an effect of slowing things down, I would think. Yeah, so, I mean, so the only reason I'm more ecumenical, I think, is that I think each one of these moments needs to be kind of analyzed in its particular historical context to see what it can bring about and what new forms of resistance they might bring about. With the idea, of course, that people who are mobilized at one point tend to be more mobilized throughout their lives, and so therefore participating in something that even might have this petit bourgeois aspect to it, or this kind of middle class aspect to it, could have some significant effects on people's way of thinking politically.
This middle class, especially the students, of course, is in the course of a very deep and brutal form of proletarization or proletarianization, which is sometimes called precariat and all that. The only question is we don't know exactly. We can't repeat that history. We don't know where it leads.
In this Temps moderne, actually, there are many testimonies of people who participated. So I don't know if we can say that any speech on Nuit Debout can be produced by only produced by the people who participated in Nuit Debout. I don't really agree with that, but still, they all say and concord on the fact that it was an extremely complex but rich experience, and they actually experienced something that they had not expected, and that actually brought them to another level of awareness, of also community involvement, etc., etc. So this was fantastic. It was part of the Uprising 3030 seminar.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing this. I was in Paris at some time during the Nuit Debout, and I went to Place de la République just to see how it worked and take some pictures. I had been as well just as a political tourist in Spain during the Indignados movement, and to see also how these micro commissions or assemblies worked and how they actually produced knowledge in those circles. That was extremely interesting to me, to go from circle to circle and listen to them. So, but let's not forget, maybe I just want to focus on something, but I don't want to break the conversation or anything or change it. But let's focus perhaps on something, is that a documentary film on the Nuit Debout is not the Nuit Debout. So I would like to focus on what Mariana Otero is trying to do in this film, and that's the question I'm wondering. So I know what I was looking for when I went there. I know what I was trying to figure out through images or by listening to those people. I was trying to understand beyond the Nuit Debout what was going on in terms of education, or as some of the people say in the film, of self-education. Or coming up with an idea of analysis of current affairs that is different. So my question is, to what extent this film by Mariana Otero, which is not the Nuit Debout, does provide us with thesis, with ideas that we can actually carry on beyond the context, beyond that particular movement. What does this documentary film produce as an essay, as a theoretical proposal?
Etienne, Balibar.This.
Did you say were you part of it?
I was not part of it. I was there as a tourist also. I've looked several times, and also through members of my... No.
I would like to hear your...
Give the mic to Mike.
Right. So it's not Mike. I was there about 4 or 5 times, starting from maybe a month and a half into the movement. And I was also present indirectly through members of my extended family, and also going back 5 years before to the first time this sort of thing was attempted. Again, with members of my extended family were deeply involved when in the attempt to start a solidarity with the Indignados in Paris. They were sort of recruited by Spanish people in Paris to try to get this started. There was, of course, a difference because they were unable to do that in Paris. They had meetings, smaller meetings. It didn't get much press coverage. They were not able to occupy a square in 2011. Something had changed 5 years later, and so one of the things I was trying to understand was what had changed, and why was it possible to occupy a square for a few months or so in 2016 when it hadn't been the case before. And many of the same people, by the way, at the very beginning, some of the people are talking about the Assemblée Générale, and they're talking about the experience they had from 2011, and some of those people were active, visible throughout the film. Not so many. Well, I don't know what the answer is. Of course, there was the Nuit Debout, which there was a focus in 2016, which there hadn't been. The Place de la République had become something of a public space as a result of because it had been selected to memorialize the victims of the massacres, and so it was not really possible to close it off in the way it had been. I actually was present in 2011 when it was announced that the Place de la Bastille was going to be occupied, just like Carte del Sol, and then the police said get back on the sidewalk, and that was the end of it. But there they couldn't do that. Now, basically, my first reaction when I arrived was the same as Etienne's, which is it's not for me. But it is a valuable educational experience, and it did serve that purpose in the sense of training a new generation to get involved in one more uprising that, like all the others, is probably going to fail. But it still maintains the spirit. And actually, the day I went, it was announced that the banlieue was finally going to join the movement. That somebody had come to bring that news, but of course it didn't happen.
It did happen.
There was a
It
small.
was in Montreuil, in Bobigny.
Yes, right. But not in the.
Well, they actually tried to delocalize it and have some gatherings in Bobigny, Montreuil. There were not thousands of people, but it did happen.
All right, so that must have been the day.
On the question of the timing and the temporality and all of the conjunctures, I do think that the fact that there was a state of emergency in France actually counterintuitively helped possibly the Nuit Debout in the sense that there was, because if I recall correctly, at the beginning there was the kind of state of emergency restrictions that were imposed, and people's reaction was a little bit like, wait a minute, we need to how can we, it made it worse in some sense.
I agree.
And so that's another kind of, just a kind of, it's always important to look at these from all their historical dimensions, but I think that was a piece of it too, somehow.
If I may add just one quick thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to comment that Occupy Wall Street did much more than just give people somehow a sense of their importance. It opened the dialogue in the U.S. to 1%, 99%. And so it stimulated the whole society to view the problems in a more profound way. And my suspicion is that I cannot say that in France also to have an occupation for that length of time of people trying to alert the world that this thing called democracy isn't, and we're looking for it. Somehow to me, it must have been similar to the 1%, 99% here in the United States.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on this?
Well, yeah, I think it's really important to try and compare Occupy with Nuit Debout because of the extraordinary similarities, I think. And one thing that Occupy really did was create a whole way of talking about the 99% that still survives today. That's part of the Bernie Sanders movement. And when you look at, Bernie just published a book called, Political Revolution, which we really probably should examine a little bit more closely. That's the title, right? It's got political revolution in the title of the book, right? Published by someone who almost was a Democratic candidate, almost. But when you look at that book, it's infused with Occupy language, right? So 99 is all over that, and etc. So those are the ways in which we can kind of see that a movement that ultimately petered out, Occupy, repressed by the police predominantly, but also bad timing because it starts in October and it's going to get cold and snowy pretty quickly. But how that movement could actually then have these ripple effects, and particularly I think in the Sanders campaign.
The weather is right-wing, right? Did you pick up that?
The Parisian weather was just terrible. It's like, oh my God.
It was running at Occupy as well. Can I say this? Of course, I don't know if the final word in the film regarding the elections and so on, the continuation of something of Nuit Debout into the is or not is an allusion to something like La France Insoumise, which some people would be tempted to compare with Lani here, etc., etc. So in parts we would have strong divergences on that. I'm sure it would be the case. As a Frenchman, of course, I may have a tendency to denigrate my own country, etc., to idealize what I see in the other. But and also, of course, because as a professor, I was here at Columbia at the time of Occupy, where I went not continuously but several times. But many of the students in my class, in my seminar, were not in the class because they were at Occupy, but they reported. I mean, there was a kind of circulation. And I'm sure this took place in other classes in this university and others in the city. So it was a kind of center of, among at least the students. So what I want to say is just the following here, is that it says something. I tend to believe that Occupy is at the same time more utopian and more realistic, because it's the whole thing, Republic on one side and Wall Street on the other side. In both cases, it seems to indicate that the seat of power is at stake, except that Wall Street is a real seat of power. And on the other hand, people gathering at Occupy Wall Street, they powerfully raise the moral and political question of the 99%, etc. But of course, they are not imagining that, like the walls of Jericho, after they turn, they blow, etc., the walls of Wall Street will fall. Nobody believe that. Whereas at the Republic, I'm a little concerned, maybe, and that's very French. That if we push hard enough, if the movement doesn't disintegrate, if we keep, etc., if people from everywhere in France rally to the Place de la République, the government will fall, which is always the goal in France.
Can I? That's a nice entry point for me, because this week is the celebration in South Korea of the candlelight demonstrations, which went on from October last in 2016 to I guess March of 2017, and in fact the government did fall. They impeached the president. She's now on trial for all the things that she did, and there's essentially a very different government in some ways, in other ways not. That's now the government, and people are thinking about what do they have to do, how do they make the changes. So in fact, and they had a different candlelight in 2008, and that didn't in fact change the government. And they had real reasons. But I think a key issue of all this was the internet and the netizens and the people using the internet that as part of building all of this. And so here we heard a little bit about it, but how it was integrated, we don't quite understand. But I think it's very important for people to be aware of different places. And South Korea internet is very big, very important in South Korea, and netizens have been very important there. And so my sense is they're in advance, but that this is the kind of thing that will, in time, have the possibility of making that next step. And so I think this is to be welcomed.
So on that point, though, I mean, so it's interesting to bring in South Korea. I mean, because in part, you know, we think about how do you resist, you know, a Trump administration, etc. And for a long time, I had felt that, and this was your opening question, for a long time I had felt that Occupy was apolitical in the sense that it stood outside of politics, outside of political contestation. And only now, I think, looking back on it, do I realize that it was entirely politically situated, that it functioned with an Obama administration as the regime in place. In other words, it functioned as a way to kind of try to push Obama to the left. That's what Occupy did. At the time, I couldn't see it really. I really did think that it was this apolitical, that we wanted to be outside of politics. But now, when I look back on it, I see it in a different way. And of course, that raises the question of how could it be that something like an occupation could actually get someone to step down, right? And of course, to me, it raises something I think is clear, but maybe I might be wrong, but that an Occupy Wall Street today with the Trump administration would actually not have any political effect. It wouldn't have the effect that it potentially could have had, and did probably, on Obama, right? And so it does raise all these questions of situating the protest and figuring out how it might have ancillary effects.
It's the theory of the old mode. The movement produces a backlash, a violent reaction. So you had Occupy Wall Street, now you have Trump. Which, to me, I don't know if you agree, but from what I said, was clearly a revenge, of course, complex one. And in France, of course, you had Nuit Debout against the Loi El Khomri, but the architect of the Loi El Khomri was Macron, who was not happy with the fact that the law, because the government, the head of state, was such a man of permanent compromises and cowardice in every possible sense, so he had retreated. The law passed, of course, because of 49, etc., but it was not what he had wished, and now he's in power. But the old mode, bury the grave.
One last question.
Dig the grave, not bury, not dig the grave.
So I found it quite surprising that the filmmaker did not include the clash with Alain Finkielkraut. I can't remember the circumstances. He must have been provocative somehow, because he always is. But the way I think the assembly reacted was quite aggressive and violent. So I was wondering if we're not overemphasizing this democratic nature of the assembly, overinflating. Maybe there is an element which is anti-democratic, or at least not overly inclusive. I mean, there was a similar moment in the documentary where there's this woman who comes with her luggage. She might be on her way to the airport, but she shares her view about the democratic process, and she says how she in fact converses or opens up to her Front National friends, and she's silenced by the assembly. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
I completely agree. I mean, the enactment, the realization of the fact that if democracy is to means something one way or another. Anybody must be able to take part and to have a say. And it's clear that the forms of the guy, I don't know if that's supposed to be a colleague, the professor, the one who teaches a class on CAS. No, that's not Frédéric Lordon. Frédéric Lordon wants to be the Lenin of Nuit Debout, and so he... The professor is clearly a professor who teaches about the history of Greek democracy, Sparta, etc., and the origins of representative or parliamentary of representation.
C'est qui?
That's very Claudio. Okay, so that's interesting, because he's really good with Saint-Omer and a few others, one of the people who elaborated something on the basis of different experiences, Brazil, Germany, and on participation. So I think he has a point when he says, or maybe because that's what I believe myself, you cannot just erase parliamentary democracy or representation in general. This is the old Rousseauist myth, or it's my friend Alain Badiou, parliament, this is capitalism or representation, etc. I don't believe that, but when the parliamentary democracy or the periodic elections has in France, that's in the last period, catastrophic, have reached a point when the moment of the election, when citizens are supposed to be able to choose, say, criticize, propose, etc., is in a sense the most negative and empty moment of the political life, then of course you need the principle of equality, if you like, or equal access to speech and public discourse to be reasserted